we tried to make even more. We did it also on Temple. We did to some extent on Vampire. And then we brought it back for Outer Worlds. I want to talk to you about how we implemented them and how some things were easier than we thought and other things were tougher. Basically, these slides are implemented by using a set of tracking variables. As the game is played, we record decisions the player makes. Now, some of those tracking variables are specific for slides, but you would be surprised how many variables already exist to do other things. So you don't really need to make new variables just to use for slides. For example, while the player is playing the game, they're doing quests, and some of them they're completing, and that gets stored. Some of them they fail, that gets stored. There are also frequently narrative designers store variables to remember what path the player took in the dialogue, or variables are used to record what achievements that the player got while they were playing the game. So in addition, the end slides, in addition to looking at particular variables that are stored for the purpose of the end slides to look at, they can also look at what quest you finished or what quest you failed, what achievements you got. Some of the things you may have said in dialogue, whether or not certain NPCs are dead, what the ones that are living, what their reaction state to the player is, and also what the what factions have certain reactions to. So you can look up like, does this faction love the player or vilify the player, those kind of things. I mean, you'd be surprised when you go and look at the game state data, what's saved away in a save game, how many end slides you can make just based on that data alone. So what we always did is we made a bunch of end slides based on that entire set of data, the specific tracking data, but then all the other things as well. And it turned out quickly that these end slides were extraordinarily dependent on the narrative designers. So you really have to get them on board with wanting to do this, because they're the ones that are ultimately going to know all the big decisions and choice points that the players are going to make throughout the story. And any of them that can't be tracked via quest or achievement or any of the other variables are going to need specific slide variables, or basically global variables that are used only by the slideshow at the end. And the reason these slides are going to be super dependent on your narrative designers are they're going to have to be responsible for tracking all those important events. They're going to have to be responsible for making sure that they have slides for all those events. And that may seem simple, but a lot of those slides you're going to have to be very careful about overlapping or interdependent events. For example, you may have a slide if you kill person A and person B becomes the ruler, you want a slide for that. But if you kill person B and person A becomes the ruler, you want a slide for that. What if you don't kill either of them? Who becomes the ruler then? What if you kill both of them? Who becomes the ruler then? Just right there, you have 4 potential slides you're going to have to make. Maybe there's a co-ruling slide where A and B roll together or get married or whatever. And then if you kill both of them, maybe it causes an uproar in the kingdom. So you need slides for all this, and you need to make sure that your narrative designers are tracking these things. One thing that happened in several of my games, and people discovered this when they went to mod them later, is the logic wasn't correct in the slides. And either a slide showed up when it shouldn't have, or the slide just didn't show up. And I talked about this when I said designers did a lot of QAing of the game at the end, because they were the ones who had to look to see if the game was doing what people wanted. QA can only tell you if the game seems to do something strange or buggy. They can tell you that it seems to be an error. They can't always catch, hey, the game did this, but the design said it should do this. The designers are the best ones to catch that. Similarly, if you see a slide appear and you didn't do anything to make it happen, you can report that and go, I don't understand why the slide came up about, A and B rolling together because I killed both A and B. But if a slide doesn't appear that was supposed to, if you're not the narrative designer in charge of that, you had no idea that slide was supposed to appear. So there's no bug to enter. It wasn't, hey, I killed A and B and it didn't say anything about it. It was, you did a lot of things it doesn't say about. You don't know that's a bug. So a big problem we run into in end slides is the narrative designers really have to own and track that system. Now, there is some dependency in end slides on art because, they're pieces of art and somebody has to make them. But since they're usually unanimated slides, sometimes done in 2D, but sometimes you can just use screenshots from the game. You can take a picture of town and a screenshot of town and say, this town thrived. You can take a picture of that town when it's being attacked by bandits or when it's burning or on fire or something and saying, this town didn't survive. And it's perfectly fine. And players are more interested in what the narrator is saying than particularly what's on the slide, as long as the slide supports it. So we found that the slides themselves weren't that big of a generation cost. It was bigger for the narrative people. Now, because of all these dependencies, despite me wanting a lot of end slides, my games have literally varied on how many end slides I've had, how many conditions we call up, how many different slides we end up showing. Now, believe me when I tell you, the goal is always to have as many as possible. Because it's very disappointing when you did something that you thought was important, and then the game doesn't recognize it at the end. The whole point of CNC is to have the game recognize at some point all the major decisions you made. Turns out, by necessity, end slides kind of have to come last. You have to have all those quests in place. You have to have those NPCs in place. And they have to be debugged, because if you spend time making end slides and then take out a quest or remove an entire area, which means you may lose some NPCs, then you've made a lot of stuff for nothing. So because of that, end slides tend to be made at the very end of game development. Well, the other two big things that happen at the end of game development are bug fixing and optimization. And those things always take priority over the end slides. So while it's true that your narrative designers and your artists tend to have the most free time towards the end, it's the programmers and QA that are super busy right at the end of the game. Sometimes you just can't spare the resources to implement the end slides. So my games have always had a varying amount of end slides, and trust me when I say I always wanted more, but I'm usually happy with what I got. If you are planning to make end slides yourself, what I would do is, as you're making the game, every single choice point, ask yourself, is this something that's going to show a consequence right away or at some point later in the game? And if yes, great. If not, ask yourself, is this something that's going to have a long-term effect that's pretty major? And if so, write down what the different slides are you need for that choice point and move on. That way when you get to the end of the game, you'll have this list of slides you want to show. You can decide how many of those can already be determined from variables you already have, and then the few that don't, you need to go into a dialogue or script and set that variable so you know that the player made that particular choice, and then you can have that slide come up. This is something that in Fallout, we scrambled to do it at the end. And then in Arcanum and Temple and Vampire, we thought head on. And for Outer Worlds, we thought of it right from the very beginning. We were paying attention to things like that. Anyway, I hope this helps you implement endgame slides. And I hope you think of them as a nice bookend to how you choose to begin your game.
Welcome to this episode of the Common Sense Skeptic, where we're going to discuss the Evolution 2 date of the Artemis program, taking you back to the very beginning through to the end of Q4 2023, and culminating in the current state of the program. We'll go through the origins of Artemis and the people whose names you should know but were involved in the decision-making processes, along with many of the steps and missteps along the way. And we're going to keep the politics involved here to a minimum in the episode and in the comments section, but we are all aware that each new federal administration comes in with their own new set of priorities where NASA is concerned. Ever since Kennedy decided to beat the Soviets to the moon in 1962.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
And the Americans did beat them. From the time Kennedy made this speech, it took NASA only 7 years of dedicated work to perfect the Apollo program to the point where Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins conducted a flawless Apollo 11 to great fanfare and international attention.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Rocket point, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're blinking again. Thanks a lot.
The Apollo moon landing program ran for 7 missions, Apollo 11 through 17, with only Apollo 13 not reaching the moon. Apollo 17 splashed down on December 18th of 1972 and concluded that program. Nobody has set foot on the moon since. The Artemis program, the current moon landing program, was announced on December 11th, 2017, exactly 45 years after Apollo 17 touched down on the moon. The announcement made by then President on December 18th of 1972 and concluded that program. Nobody has set foot on the moon since. The Artemis program, the current moon landing program, was announced on December 11th, 2017, exactly 45 years after Apollo 17 touched down on the moon. The announcement made by then President Donald J. Trump and his Vice President Mike Pence. In case anybody is unaware, currently in the American system of government, the Vice President of the United States is the senior government official directly involved with NASA as the chair of the National Space Council. Created in 1989 under Bush Sr. and Dan Quayle as a modified version of the National Aeronautics and Space Council that it replaced that ran from 1958 to 1973. That council was mothballed in 1993 when the Clinton-Gore administration was sworn in, remaining inactive through George W.'s tenure and through Obama's as well, during which time the shuttle program and the shuttle replacement program were both shut down for good, costing America the ability to send its own astronauts to space. For his legacy project, Trump brought the NSC back online in 2017, when Pence and Trump signed the White House Space Policy Directive No. 1, setting out the ambitious goal of landing humans on the moon again by the end of what was expected to be Trump's second presidential term ending in 2024, giving NASA the same 7-year timeframe it took them to perform that task in the 1960s.
The directive I'm signing today will refocus America's space program on human exploration and discovery. It marks an important step in returning American astronauts to the moon for the first time since 1972 for long-term exploration and use. This time, we will not only plant our flag and leave our footprint, we will establish a foundation for an eventual mission to Mars and perhaps someday to many worlds beyond.
To aid in meeting that deadline, Trump nominated Congressman Jim Bridenstine of Oklahoma as the 13th NASA administrator in September 2017. Bridenstine was sworn in by Mike Pence after an extended and sometimes painful nomination process in April of 2018. 2 years after announcing the Moon Initiative in December 2019, Trump made another huge announcement, creating the fifth arm of the U.S. military called Space Force, attaching it to a $738 billion defense bill and reiterating the 2024 deadline for landing Americans on the moon. To that end, Bridenstine had NASA working up a program paradigm that would not only get human feet back on lunar soil, but would create a system where this could become a regular occurrence instead of a singular spectacle. And in September 2019, 3 months prior to the Space Force announcement, NASA had already put out an open call for lunar lander proposals for the program they named Artemis. Several teams submitted bids for consideration, vying for one of the 2 available contracts. 3 teams were picked for further program development on April 30th of 2020. Blue Origin led the national team that included Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Draper, each in charge of a major component of the system. The Dynetics Human Landing System team used talents from 25 specialized subcontractors to put together their design proposal. And SpaceX took their concept for HLS from their Mars Starship, modifying their most recent CGI file by removing the heat shield tiles and coloring it white to make it look more like a lunar lander. Musk at the same time was convincing venture capitalists that his 2016 BFR, renamed Starship and revealed in 2019 to great fanfare at Boca Chica, Texas, was going to be sending multiple starships loaded with supplies to Mars in 2022, to await the arrival of the first Mars colonists in 2024 that would lay the groundwork for his city of 1 million people on the red planet by 2050. Compared to Mars, the moon should have been easy money for a machine that Musk had been making CGI animations and grand promises about since September of 2016, when he first introduced the ship at a conference in Guadalajara, Mexico. Case in point about a grand promise, the 2018 TED Talk with Gwynne Shotwell, promising point-to-point rockets on Earth for human travel within a decade.
I mean, Gwen, come on, this is awesome, but it's crazy, right? Like, this is never going to actually happen.
Oh no, it's definitely going to happen. This is definitely going to happen.
So you really believe this is going to be deployed at some point in our amazing future? When?
We'll be within this decade. Within a decade. Not this decade.
That's certainly amazing.
Just over 4 years to go, Gwen. Not liking your chances on making good on that promise. To finance moving the 3 lunar lander proposals forward, NASA awarded $579 million to the national team, $253 million to point to. Compared to Mars, the moon should have been easy money for a machine that Musk had been making CGI animations and grand promises about since September of 2016, when he first introduced the ship at a conference in Guadalajara, Mexico. Case in point about a grand promise, the 2018 TED Talk with Gwynne Shotwell, promising point-to-point rockets on Earth for human travel within a decade.
I mean, Gwen, come on, this is awesome, but it's crazy, right? Like, this is never going to actually happen.
Oh no, it's definitely going to happen. This is definitely going to happen.
So you really believe this is going to be deployed at some point in our amazing future? When?
We'll be within this decade. Within a decade. Not this decade.
That's certainly amazing.
Just over 4 years to go, Gwen. Not liking your chances on making good on that promise. To finance moving the 3 lunar lander proposals forward, NASA awarded $579 million to the national team, $253 million to Dynetics, and $135 million to SpaceX. For the next year, the teams were to work towards the objective of designing, building out, and testing their proposed vehicles. But before the year was over, the biggest unpredicted problem facing this program would rear its head and change the landscape of this competition. Not knowing what was to come, the 3 teams went about their business. To make sure they were on the right track in August of 2020, the Blue Origin team delivered a full-scale engineering mock-up of their 3-stage machine to the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility in Johnson Space Center's iconic Building 9. The purpose of the 13-meter-tall mock-up was to allow NASA crew to get a feel for the machine, see what works, what doesn't, how panels or controls should be positioned for the crew. It allowed NASA to provide valuable feedback that Blue Origin would then take into consideration for new revisions. Importantly, the lander Blue Origin created was already compatible with existing launch systems and technology, capable of being launched on any heavy rocket. In September of 2020, Dynetics delivered their mock-up as well, again working with the NASA staff to collect information and feedback. Their team provided this concise explanation for the goals of this interaction.
We're using this test article for what we call human-in-the-loop task analysis. Simply put, it means we're looking into things like habitable volume. How much space does the crew need to eat, sleep, and live? Anthropometric accommodation. How much space do the astronauts need to do every one of their many jobs? How can we make those jobs as easy as possible? And how can we make the space as comfortable as possible when they're not working? Placement and orientation about components, stowage, and interfaces. Is everything easily accessible? Have we minimized necessary movements? If something goes wrong, how easy is it for the crew to assess the problem and get access to the solution? Intravehicular and extravehicular activities. Can the astronauts move in and through the vehicle comfortably, safely? How easy and safe is it for the crew to exit the vehicle onto the lunar surface and then get back in again?
At this point in time, while Blue Origin and Dynetics were already delivering during full-scale walkthroughs, empty Starship test articles were just starting to make hops and attempting to land. SN8 left the first of many craters in Boca Chica on December 9th of 2020 during their attempt to land. Super Heavy was still sitting on a drawing board, and no full-scale HLS mockup was delivered to NASA for their staff to review. Although SpaceX were conducting their first tests on a cable crane required to get astronauts from the Starship airlock to the surface 30 meters below that hatch. Of course, wire crane platforms like this were something never before accomplished on Earth. And while Musk was treating Southeast Texas like his own private destructive testing range,